Hi everyone, I'm Ali, I'm an architect, and today we're going to talk about part 3, the lowdown. So let's go. Hi guys, so as I've mentioned in the past, I want to do a few videos on part 3 exam questions specifically, because when I was doing my part 3, I found that was one of the things that is missing. You'll all know if you're studying for part 3, you can get access to past papers, but not necessarily answers. But that's something I want to take a bit more time over and think about how I format that and how it's best to kind of do it. So that's not this video. This video I thought is just better to give a quick kind of, and when I say quick, I mean me saying quick, so not quick, but a lowdown on part 3 and what it kind of is and what the constituent parts of it are. And this is subject to a massive caveat, which is it depends on where you take your part 3. Having taken my part 3 twice, then the two places I did it are massively different, and they were suitable for me in different ways because of the different times I took it. But this is something that we'll kind of touch on now. So first of all, what is part 3? So if you look back at the Becoming an Architect video, then you'll see that part 3 is the kind of end state. It's the final examinations before you can use the title architect. So if you pass, you can register with the ARB and become an architect. And if you fail, you can't. So you need to resit the part 3. And if you check out the video on the ARB, so both of those will be linked in the description below, then that explains why you need to sit the exam in order to be able to use the title architect. And so part 3 is really, it's a final examination. It's like a bar exam for a lawyer. It usually takes, the standard course is a year long, and not every school that offers bachelor's or master's degrees offers a part 3 course. So for example, in Scotland, all the schools of architecture in Scotland use APEAS as their kind of examination board for part 3. And in the northwest of England, then Liverpool, Manchester, and I believe there is some others, use the Northwest, the RIBA Northwest School for theirs. In London, there's quite a variety of schools which have different courses, and we can have another video on what courses are like and the difference between them. So a lot of people where I work have done their part 3 at Westminster, and my second time I did mine at the Architectural Association in London, and that was because they offer a shorter course and also they don't require a case study, but we will get into that in a second. Okay, so if you're watching this having done your master's degree, you've probably noticed that the teaching in things like construction law has ramped up and that you're expected to know stuff about contracts and all the kind of legal side of architecture. Essentially the part 3 is that a bit more, because the part 3 again is testing your competency to practice, and also the legal situation that an architect is in, their responsibility to their clients and their responsibility to themselves and any business they run to protect themselves from risks. So essentially the part 3 is looking at legal relationships and legal situations in architecture. So whether that's from contracts with your clients, like a written appointment, or situations with planning and building regulations, and what you know about those and how you advise your client on those. And also the same for construction contracts and sort of legal relationships there, whether you're novated if you're in design and build, or whether you have you're as a designer have collateral warranties. There's a load of things that we can touch on in other videos. But basically that's what part 3 is testing you more on, is the architect's position legally in the whole construction project, and particularly with your clients. Thinking about taking a part 3, then I think before you get to the point where you're actually registering with a course, a great book to have a look at, not necessarily buy, is this. There is a new version of this out now. This is mine, the 2nd edition, with a load of stuff in it. I'm sure that's noisy. This is a really, really great book because it kind of runs you through the whole process. It tells you all the constituent parts, tells you about finding a school that's appropriate. And honestly, the first time I did my part 3, I lived in a place where it was really difficult to find other people doing their part 3, and it was before video calling was really, really popular. So I didn't have that much of a support network with actually undertaking my part 3, and any kind of information I could get was a bonus. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to start a YouTube channel, is that I felt there isn't enough information about particularly part 3 as an architect, and what the hell you're supposed to be doing and what you're being tested on and what the point of it is. And the second time I sat it, I was so much more ready basically to do it. but I'm glad I did it. I ended up doing it twice. I think I learned a lot from that whole process. And essentially that's what the part 3 is kind of testing you on, is your whole career progression to that point, how you think about your role as an architect, and whether or not you're competent to be an architect and carry the title, which kind of means, upholding the profession, essentially. Again, check out the ARB video about stuff like that. Okay, and then there's the constituent parts of your part 3. So there's kind of 2 main pieces. The first is the documentary kind of evidence that you need to provide. The first main part of that is your PEDR. So again, from Becoming an Architect video, you'll see those 2 blocks. You need 24 months logged and signed off PEDR in order to be able to sit your part 3 exam. And usually when you're applying to a school to do part 3, or to a body to do part 3, what they want is proof of your PEDR, so that you either already have 24 months logged with the 12 months directly before this exam, or that you will have 24 months when you get to the point of the course where you're actually sitting the examinations. And that, again, depends on which school you're at and when the examination is. But that's the first part of documentary evidence. The second is a CV, just a curriculum vitae, basically, of what you've done, and the different places you've worked and how long in your career. And again, that varies slightly, like school/examination body to examination body. But, they all require that information. The third is your career appraisal, which is really the kind of most interesting of those 3, because that's your chance to kind of look back and reflect on your career, and the choices you've made, whether good or bad, and how they've influenced what kind of person and what kind of architect you're going to be. And really explain that to the examiners. They're going to read all of this documentation, so you want to say like why you've done things, why, basically demonstrating why you think you're competent, but also just explaining a bit about your journey and why you want to be an architect. As a lot of people who might be watching this are architects will know, it's quite a demanding job, and so to want to do it, you kind of do really need to want to do it. So they want to see why you're interested in this as a career, and the career appraisal is the best way to be able to do that. And it's really good to see it as an opportunity for that, for you to kind of speak directly to the examiners and explain your experience. So it's actually a really good thing, even though at the time it can feel like another annoying thing you have to fill out. So that's kind of the documentary side of the part 3. And then there's the actual kind of examination side of the part 3, which is again made up of 3 things. So the first is the case study. Not all, but pretty much all schools require you to have a case study. And this is usually of a live project that you've worked on directly, that you have first-hand experience of, and that you understand any pros and cons, good and bad points that have happened in that job, and that you reflect on them specifically for the part 3. So again, you're demonstrating professionalism and a knowledge of kind of the whole process of doing an architectural job, and just, what you've learned from that, essentially. The second is the examinations. So this depends on where you go. So again, a quick comparison. When I was doing my part 3 with the P's in Scotland, the way that examination works is it's a 24-hour exam in a room with some books, and you can either stay for the full 24 hours or you can go home. But basically, by the end of the 24 hours, you need to have finished all those questions, and then they get submitted. And then at the Architectural Association in London, they instead do 4 exams. Keep trying to remember, but 4 exams. The first one you get a month to fill out. It's like paper 1, but it's actually more of a kind of setup of a whole scenario. And then the other 3 you sit over 2 days. Yep. You sit over 2 days at the Architectural Association in London. So that's just 2 examples of how examinations are different in different schools. It's why it's worth shopping around. We can do a video on the different schools and what they're like. And then the third part is the interview or an examination. So this is where you'll meet 2 examiners. These are the people who've read all your information. They've had access to your CV, your career appraisal, your PEDR, all your examination answers, and your case study. And basically they're going to ask you about it. And yeah, kind of just try and figure out if they think you're suitable to be, accepted as an architect if you want to. So basically the part 3 gives you the right to register with the ARB as an architect, and that's what they're testing you for, essentially. The interview, for me, I think is a really great part of the process, because if, like me and like most people, you've made a fuck up in your examination or something, then you can say to them, look, I know that question now, it was stupid. So usually the examination is a bit later, sometimes some months later, sometimes 1 month later, depending on the schools and how they run their course. But you have time in between the end of your examinations and your interview to look back over everything that you've submitted, and to kind of decide whether or not you think those were good answers, or if there's anything there that you would change in hindsight. And you can say that directly to the examiners at the interview and explain why you think that, and that's what they want. Again, they're trying to see like how you think about things, what you know, and test your knowledge and whether it's really broad or really narrow. And essentially the reason I failed my part 3 the first time is that my knowledge was just too narrow and too specific to one kind of architectural practice. But we can go into that more in a different video. So as I said, what I'd really like to do is some videos on specific exam questions, and that's my kind of plan in the very near future, because I lent out my copy of the AA exam that I sat, and I have it back, so I'm going to try and use that and my answers to formulate a few videos about that, and we'll see how that goes, but hopefully giving like a few example answers. And I don't know how, I mean, it passed, but you don't get kind of like, well, you get a pass or a fail, you don't get a grade, they don't say that was wrong but this was right. So it's really difficult with part 3. If you're studying for part 3, you'll know that you've probably had past papers made available to you, but there's no answers, and that can feel really bewildering, because you're like, well, how the hell am I supposed to know then, because there's a practice paper but it doesn't actually tell you what you're supposed to say. But that's because exactly what they're trying to test you on is, well, what would you say? And if you have absolutely no clue, or the majority of questions you have no clue, then that's a kind of key indicator that you might be in more of the place I was in the first time I took my exam, which wasn't really bad. It just, I didn't know enough. And it's not that you can't pass in that situation, you just need to read more around some topics and kind of understand the things that maybe you wouldn't normally be party to. It can be really difficult as well if you're in a small practice. Obviously the exam will include questions for people for things that happen in big practice and vice versa, and you need to know those things. So it can feel a bit like ridiculous, but essentially if you pass your part 3 exam, you're counted as an architect on a certain level, the same as people who've been architects for like 30 plus years and whatever. And so you need to be at a certain level and a certain standard to be able to have that title. So yeah, so that's the plan, is to kind of go through a bit more of that in detail in future videos. So yeah, today, just a bit of a lowdown. So what we've done there is we've talked about the key documentation. So the CV, the PDR and your career appraisal, these are things that they kind of request for, and they're in addition to the other work that you do. And then the part 3 itself is made up of your case study, examinations, and then the interview stage. So all that together is what you kind of submit for your part 3. And as I say, that varies depending on schools. And we can have a bit of a video where we look at schools, particularly the cost of them and how long the courses take, things like that, because these are kind of key considerations. So it's really worth shopping around depending on what you personally want and what your strengths are. And also, whether time and things are an issue, or like a case study, for example, like for me was an issue, then that's why it's good to be able to have a bit more variety in which school you pick. If you find it interesting, please do drop a like on the video and subscribe. That really helps me out, and it helps other people find these videos if they are helpful. If they're not helpful, also tell me what you want to know. Drop it in the comments below. And yeah, hopefully soon we will get onto some videos actually about part 3 questions and how you should maybe go about answering them. Again, it's just going to be it's not going to be like me telling you the answers, yes or no. It's going to be more like, this is how you should think about this question and the things you need to think about considering. And that's what's critical to know, and then it varies what the answer is depending on the situation. But if you learn that kind of process, you can apply it to basically any part 3 question, and that's much more useful than just learning answers to things, which is what I fucking hate about school. So anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time, guys. Thanks. Bye. It's just gonna slowly drop over the course of the video. Fingers crossed there's something in there that's not complete shite.